Before you decide this message isn't about you, let me ask you something. What if the fear that has kept your twin flame at a distance for so long, the one they've never fully named, even to themselves, has finally been faced, and what if facing it has changed everything about their readiness to finally move toward you? What if the runner isn't running anymore, not because circumstances forced them to stop, but because something inside them shifted so completely that running no longer feels like the only option available? Most people believe that twin flame separation ends through circumstance, timing finally aligning, life simplifying, obstacles clearing away. But there is a far more significant, far less discussed catalyst that tends to precede genuine, lasting reunion. The moment a person finally confronts the specific fear that has been driving their avoidance all along, and discovers, often to their own surprise, that the fear was never as insurmountable as it once seemed. Right now, your twin flame may be standing on the other side of exactly this confrontation. Whatever specific fear has shaped their distance, fear of losing themselves, fear of being truly seen, fear of repeating old patterns of abandonment or engulfment, may have finally reached a breaking point where avoidance became more painful than facing it directly. This is rarely a comfortable process. Breaking through a fear that has organized someone's entire approach to intimacy for years, sometimes for their whole life, is disorienting, often painful, and never happens without real internal struggle. But when it happens genuinely, the shift it produces tends to be significant and lasting, changing not just their relationship to fear itself, but their entire capacity for the kind of closeness they once believed was too dangerous to risk. But before you assume this breakthrough is only about their internal fear, there's something more important to understand. This isn't just a story about someone overcoming an obstacle. It's about what becomes possible once someone finally stops organizing their entire life around avoiding a specific pain, and discovers, often for the first time, what it feels like to move toward connection instead of away from it. Because sometimes the most significant turning point in a twin flame connection isn't a dramatic reunion scene. It's the quiet, internal moment when someone finally decides that facing their fear is worth more than continuing to protect themselves from it. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to hear may completely change the way you understand fear, breakthrough, and the specific internal shift that often precedes genuine movement in a twin flame connection. Have you ever sensed that beneath someone's distance, there was a very specific fear operating, something more precise than simple unavailability, something that, if you could just name it clearly, would explain almost everything about their behavior? Twin flame separation is rarely caused by generic uncertainty or simple lack of interest. More often, it is driven by a specific, identifiable fear, one usually rooted in earlier experiences that predate the twin flame connection entirely, but that the intensity of this particular bond has activated with unusual force. For many people, this fear centers on loss of self, a belief, often unconscious, that genuine merging with another person threatens their individual identity, autonomy, or sense of control. This fear often develops in people who experienced enmeshment or a lack of healthy boundaries earlier in life, where closeness became associated with losing oneself entirely within another person's needs or expectations. For others, the core fear centers on abandonment, a belief that genuine investment in closeness inevitably leads to eventual loss, making the safest strategy to withhold full investment in the first place, protecting against a pain that feels inevitable rather than merely possible. This fear often traces back to early experiences of inconsistent caregiving or significant loss that shaped a person's fundamental expectations about what closeness ultimately leads to. Still others carry a fear centered on unworthiness, a deep belief that being fully seen and known will inevitably lead to rejection, once someone discovers who they truly are beneath whatever composed exterior they've maintained. This fear often develops through early experiences of conditional love or acceptance, where a person learned that only certain, curated aspects of themselves were acceptable to others. The specific nature of your twin flame's core fear matters significantly, because it shapes exactly what breaking through that fear actually requires, and what it looks like once genuine breakthrough occurs. Someone whose primary fear centers on loss of self may need to develop genuine trust that closeness with you does not require abandoning their own identity or autonomy. Someone whose primary fear centers on abandonment may need to develop trust in your consistency and reliability over an extended period before genuinely believing that investment in this connection is safe. Someone whose primary fear centers on unworthiness may need direct experiences of being fully seen and still accepted before their underlying belief about inevitable rejection can genuinely shift. Understanding which of these dynamics, or which combination of them, has been driving your twin flame's distance can offer significant insight into what breakthrough might actually look like for them specifically, rather than assuming a generic process applies identically to every situation. Genuinely confronting and moving through a core fear that has organized someone's approach to intimacy for years is rarely a single, dramatic event. More often, it involves a gradual accumulation of experiences and internal shifts that eventually reach a tipping point where the old fear-based pattern becomes genuinely, sustainably interrupted. Repeated exposure to evidence that contradicts the original fear plays a significant role in this process. Someone whose fear centers on abandonment gradually develops different expectations through repeated experiences of consistency and reliability, evidence accumulated over time that eventually begins to outweigh the original belief that closeness inevitably leads to loss. This process cannot be rushed. It requires genuinely sustained experience, not simply a single reassuring conversation or gesture, however meaningful that individual moment might be. Direct confrontation with the fear itself, rather than continued avoidance, is often necessary for genuine breakthrough to occur. This might happen through therapy, where a person examines the origin of their fear with professional support. It might happen through a significant life event that makes continued avoidance impossible or unsustainable. It might happen simply through accumulated exhaustion, a point where the effort required to maintain avoidance finally exceeds the person's capacity to keep sustaining it. Genuine breakthrough also typically requires the person to develop a different relationship with discomfort itself, learning to tolerate the anxiety that arises when moving toward the very thing they've spent years avoiding, rather than immediately retreating the moment that anxiety becomes present. This capacity for tolerating discomfort without immediate avoidance is a skill that develops gradually, often through deliberate practice, sometimes with professional support, rather than emerging instantly through simple decision or willpower. It's worth understanding that breakthrough, when it genuinely occurs, does not mean the original fear disappears completely and permanently. More realistically, it means the fear's grip loosens significantly, no longer automatically dictating behavior the way it once did. The person may still experience anxiety when moving toward closeness, but they develop the capacity to move forward despite that anxiety, rather than allowing the fear to continue determining their choices entirely. If your twin flame has genuinely broken through their core fear, this represents significant, often hard-won internal work that likely required real struggle, real discomfort, and real commitment to facing something they had successfully avoided for a very long time. Distinguishing genuine breakthrough from temporary courage that quickly reverts back to the original avoidant pattern requires attention to specific, sustained signs rather than a single hopeful moment. One significant sign is consistency of behavior change over time, rather than an isolated instance of bravery followed by a return to the familiar pattern of distance. If your twin flame has shown a sustained shift in how they engage with closeness, increased communication, willingness to discuss difficult topics, initiating rather than merely tolerating connection, across an extended period rather than a single conversation or interaction, this consistency is meaningful evidence of genuine internal change. Another important sign involves how they discuss their previous distance and avoidance. Someone who has genuinely broken through their core fear often develops increased capacity to speak honestly about what drove their previous behavior, acknowledging fear directly rather than offering the vague, deflecting explanations that typically accompany unexamined avoidance. This kind of honest self-reflection, particularly when it includes specific insight into their own patterns rather than simply generic statements, often indicates genuine internal work rather than a temporary shift in behavior without corresponding internal understanding. A third meaningful sign is their response to your own vulnerability or need for reassurance. Someone whose core fear remains largely unaddressed often responds to a partner's vulnerability with subtle discomfort or deflection, even while otherwise appearing to have made progress. Someone who has genuinely broken through their fear tends to show increased capacity to receive vulnerability from you without becoming defensive or retreating, demonstrating that their internal shift extends to genuine capacity for reciprocal intimacy, not simply an isolated change in their own individual behavior. Pay attention also to how they handle moments of relational stress or conflict following this apparent breakthrough. Genuine internal transformation tends to hold up, at least reasonably well, under the pressure of difficult moments, disagreements handled with continued presence rather than an immediate return to the old pattern of retreat. If their newfound openness disappears entirely the moment any genuine difficulty arises, this may indicate the breakthrough remains incomplete or fragile rather than fully established. If you're noticing these signs together, sustained behavioral consistency, honest self-reflection about previous patterns, increased capacity to receive your vulnerability, and continued presence even during difficult moments, these represent strong evidence that your twin flame's breakthrough reflects genuine, significant internal change rather than a temporary or superficial shift. There is a specific reason why breaking through a core fear so often precedes genuine, sustained movement in a twin flame connection, rather than simply representing an interesting internal development disconnected from external relational change. As long as a core fear remains largely unaddressed, any movement toward closeness tends to remain unstable, subject to the fear reasserting itself and triggering retreat, regardless of external circumstances or the quality of the connection itself. This is why twin flame connections often experience cycles of approach and avoidance that seem disconnected from anything happening in the actual relationship. The underlying fear, rather than relationship dynamics themselves, is often the primary driver of these fluctuations. Once genuine breakthrough occurs, however, movement toward closeness tends to become considerably more stable and sustainable, because the underlying force that previously triggered automatic retreat has genuinely loosened its grip. This does not guarantee permanent, uninterrupted forward movement. Human growth is rarely perfectly linear, but it does tend to produce a qualitatively different, more sustainable pattern than the repeated cycles of approach and avoidance that typically characterize connections where the core fear remains unaddressed. This is why genuine breakthrough often functions as a meaningful turning point within twin flame connections specifically. It is not simply one positive development among many. It often represents the resolution of the primary internal obstacle that had been preventing sustained closeness all along, opening genuine space for the kind of consistent, secure connection that was previously undermined by cycles of unconscious fear-driven retreat. If your twin flame has genuinely broken through their core fear, this may indeed represent a significant and meaningful shift in the trajectory of your connection, not because breakthrough guarantees a specific outcome, but because it removes what was likely the primary internal barrier that had been preventing sustained movement toward genuine closeness. The way you respond to your twin flame during and after this significant internal breakthrough can meaningfully influence whether this shift solidifies into lasting change or becomes destabilized by well-intentioned but poorly timed reactions. Avoiding excessive celebration or intense emotional reaction to their initial signs of breakthrough is important, even though this instinct is completely understandable given how significant this shift likely feels to you. An intensely emotional response, even a positive one, can feel overwhelming to someone whose capacity for receiving intense emotional expression may still be developing, potentially triggering exactly the kind of retreat their breakthrough was meant to overcome. Patience with the nonlinear nature of this process matters significantly as well. Genuine breakthrough rarely produces immediate, uninterrupted forward movement. There will likely be moments where old patterns briefly resurface, particularly during stressful or vulnerable situations. Responding to these temporary regressions with continued patience and understanding, rather than significant disappointment or alarm, supports the overall stability of their ongoing growth rather than potentially reinforcing shame that could undermine it. Continuing to maintain your own healthy boundaries and self-respect throughout this process remains important as well. Their breakthrough does not require you to become endlessly, unconditionally accommodating regardless of how they treat you moving forward. Genuine twin flame connection, even following significant individual breakthrough, still requires mutual respect and healthy relational dynamics from both people involved. Offering consistent, steady presence, rather than either excessive pursuit or complete withdrawal, tends to provide the most supportive environment for their continued growth. This steady middle ground, available and warm without being overwhelming or anxiously pursuing, allows them the space to continue moving toward closeness at a pace that feels genuinely sustainable rather than pressured. While much of this message is focused on your twin flame's significant internal breakthrough, it's worth examining your own continued growth throughout the same period, because twin flame connections rarely ask only one person to do meaningful internal work. It's worth honestly considering what fears or patterns you may have been working through during the same period, whether related directly to this connection or to your own individual growth more broadly. If your twin flame has done significant work to break through their core fear, meeting that breakthrough with your own continued stagnation or unexamined patterns creates an imbalance that may eventually create new difficulties, even after their significant individual progress. This inner work matters because sustainable twin flame connection ultimately requires both people bringing genuine growth and self-awareness to the relationship, not simply one partner's transformation meeting the other's unchanged patterns. If you have not engaged in similarly honest self-examination during this period, this may be a valuable time to do so, ensuring the foundation you're building together reflects genuine mutual growth rather than an imbalanced dynamic. It is also worth remembering that your own security and continued growth remain valuable and important regardless of your twin flame's specific timeline or process. Building your own life, continuing your own healing, and maintaining your own sense of purpose and fulfillment independent of this connection's outcome ensures that whatever unfolds between you, you remain someone capable of genuine, secure connection, both within this relationship and beyond it. If your twin flame has genuinely broken through the fear that has kept them at a distance, understand that this represents significant, often difficult internal work that likely required real courage and real willingness to face something they had spent years successfully avoiding. This breakthrough does not guarantee a specific outcome or timeline for how your connection ultimately unfolds, but it does represent the resolution of what was likely the primary internal obstacle preventing sustained closeness all along, opening genuine space for the kind of secure, consistent connection that fear-driven avoidance had previously made impossible. Whatever comes next, trust that this breakthrough matters, both for your connection and for your twin flame's own individual growth and well-being, regardless of exactly how or when it translates into specific movement toward you. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. If this message resonated with what you've been sensing in your own connection, I hope it offered a little clarity about the internal process your twin flame may have been moving through, and a little validation for the patience and understanding you've likely needed to offer throughout. This has been the Archetype Awakening. I hope this video helped you understand that genuine breakthrough is rarely dramatic or instant, and reminded you that the quiet, internal work someone does to face their deepest fear is often the most significant step toward the closeness you've both been reaching for. Wishing you patience for their continued unfolding, honesty in examining your own growth, and the deep, secure connection that becomes possible once fear no longer stands where love was always meant to be. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next video.